Okay, good afternoon. Welcome everybody to the second session of the Spring 2021 Sunoikisis Digital Classics syllabus. This semester we're focusing on digital cultural heritage. And for this session, the topic is community mapping. For those of you who are watching live, you have a live chat feature next to the YouTube video, and you can leave comments, questions, you can introduce yourselves, and you can join in the discussion that we will have at the end of this session. For those of you who are not watching live, this is just a video that you're watching. You're welcome to reuse it, use it in teaching or in any other way as you find useful. So for this session, all the content is being given to you by our two presenters, Valeria Vitale, who you can see above on the left, who works at the British Library on the Locating a National Collection project, and James Morley, who you can see above on the right, who most notably the creator of the A Street Near You app, which he will also talk a little bit about a bit later. So they're both going to talk a couple of times. We're going to go back and forth on a couple of topics, and then there will be a presentation of a suggested exercise at the end for anyone who's doing this either as part of a course, for whom it's not a suggested exercise but an obligatory one, or anyone who's doing this for their own edification, in which case you're welcome to play along as well. So I think I will start by, I will hand over directly to Valeria.
Thank you, Gabby, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session that is the first one of our more geographically oriented stream, and we're starting with community mapping, or we will talk about community mapping, but more generally about the use and the reuse of open geodata. And I'm going to start sharing my screen now. Great, thank you, Gabby. So just a brief outline, just very in very general terms. These are the things that we will be talking about, and we will start with, why place matters for cultural heritage scholars, but also for professionals in the GLAM sector, that is galleries, libraries, archives and museums, but also for us all, consumers of cultural heritage. And we will talk a little bit more specifically about how these kind of data, geodata, can be gathered. And I mean it both more talking a little bit more about the technical side, so what are the formats, but also what are the most appropriate contexts and what are the strategies to gather such information. And last, possibly the most, important thing is what we can do with this information. How can we use geodata, and what are both the direct and the indirect benefits of using this data? And the information that, wrong slide. Okay, let's start with the first one that we mentioned, which is, why does place matter? And this might sound like an obvious question, and of course there are countless answers to that. I'm just going to focus briefly on the two aspects that are more relevant to the things that we're going to talk about today, and why does place matter in our work with digital cultural heritage. And the first thing is that, well, events always happen in a spatial context, and this is true for historical events. That, of course, it's important to look at them in a spatial in their spatial environment, but also our own events, the events that happen in our lives, and we will see that that matters too when we talk about digital cultural heritage. But also from a, let's say, a little bit more practical perspective, place is also a very particular kind of information, and compared to other variables, to other kind of data and metadata, it's relatively more standardized, or as we will see, is more standardizable, at least in theory, than other kind of information. And what does that mean? It means that it can be used as a quite powerful aggregator of information. And I will try to give you some less abstract examples of what I mean by that. And the knowledge, the expertise that I'm sharing with you today comes from two projects I have worked on, or I'm still working on, that were basically built on this concept. And the first one is the Pelagius project, which was a quite long lived digital humanities project. It ran for 8 years, which is a lot of time for us. And it has then morphed into other things, but as a project ended at the end of 2019. And its goal was exactly this. It was about connecting digital historical resources based on their shared place references. And we built some proof of concept for that, which is what you're looking at. This is Periplaio, our map-based API that is basically showing place-related connections among different collections that contributed their data. And think of, how useful it could be, for example, for a museum to show the distribution of a kind of object, for example, and how this could be used, for example, to identify links between different collections that were not obvious before, or identify trends, or on the contrary, identifying gaps. Where are the holes in the distributions, and why there are these holes? So place is actually quite an important interpretive lens when we look at collections, besides, as we said, being a great way of connecting the data. And by the way, this API is available. It's online. It's free. Feel free to have a go at it. We will talk more about the Pelagius project and another of their tools that is called Recogito in another class in a few weeks. And the other project I'm currently working on, as Gabby said, is Locating a National Collection, which is a collaboration between the British Library, the University of Exeter, National Trust, and Historical Royal Palaces. Again, it's very much it's within a larger funding scheme that is called Towards a National Collection. And its aim, again, is to create links across different collections using place information in the data, in the metadata, any kind of place information. So the Pelagius project was very much relying on linked open data. Locating a National Collection looks at all kind of place references. But another aspect that we started exploring is about the connection that people feel with place, and how we can use this connection maybe to make people more interested in cultural heritage. And some of the information that we're gonna discuss during this seminar come from interviews that I conducted within this project with people that work in cultural heritage, or people that consume cultural heritage. And we found that, yes, place is something that people find engaging for a number of reasons. And again, I'm going to isolate just a few of them to introduce the other examples that we're going to cover later on. And first, we found that place, of course, has a strong connection with memory and with our personal memories, and with the events of our life. So people, and I say people, actually, I should say us, all of us, we care about the places of our past And we are more likely to engage with those places, the places that have actually a live connection with us, or with our parents, or with our grandparents, and so on. And just to prove my point, I'm showing you in this slide a photograph that is probably interesting to me only, because it's an old photograph of my hometown. And I saw it and I thought, oh my God, this is so beautiful and interesting. But that's because I was born there. And that's, that's exactly what we found in our interviews. And a project that I think really made the most of leveraging this personal collection, this affective, emotional connection that people feel with the places of their life, especially, I have to say, with the places of their earlier life, is GB 1900, which stands for Great Britain 1900, which is a historical gazetteer. And you have a reading about this gazetteer, and if after that you still are not clear on what the gazetteer is, fear not, because we're going to have a whole session about gazetteers again in a few weeks. And this historical gazetteer of the United Kingdom was basically produced without funding, and just thanks to the voluntary contribution of people that got really passionate about transcribing the Ordnance Survey's maps from the early 20th century. If you're not familiar with the Ordnance Survey's maps, were very beautifully made, very detailed maps that were produced at that time for the whole nation. And obviously, what the majority of people did was going to, the places that they knew better, the places where they were born, the places where they were living, and started transcribing the names that they could see on the map. And even trying to do that with machine learning would have taken much more time. Plus, the people that were doing these transcriptions were also experts of those places, because they lived them. They really knew what those abbreviations meant. They really could interpret the spatial information. And by the way, if you have time, I really invite you to check out the GB 1900 website, and to look at how nicely on the National Library of Scotland website, how nicely you can play with the overlay of the Ordnance Survey maps with the satellite imagery. We also found, talking again with professionals, that of course there is a strong connection between place and personal and cultural identities. People do identify with their places, and they do identify with some aspects of their places. And this is an important piece of information, not just because it is useful for us looking at cultural heritage, for people who want to work with cultural heritage management, but also because we should always bear in mind that place can be sensitive information, and we should remember that information about place names, geography, they have to be handled with a certain care, with a certain respect, because place names matter, and geographic information matter. And we will talk more about that, also about, let's say, the interplay between colonialism and preserving place names. But in general, we found this strong connection between place and personal identities. And this is true not only, for us, for contemporary for us in contemporary times, and our relationships with the place we were born, the places where we live now. But it's also an interesting key, I believe, to keep in mind for historians. Even when we look at ancient or historical material, I think we can understand a lot more if we bear in mind that not all cultures look at place in the same way, and interpretations of place are cultural. And I strongly, again, invite you to check out this great project that is digging into early colonial Mexico, that looks exactly at depiction of space in early colonial Mexico, and all the ways in which they differ, and all the ways in which they interact with the European conception of space, with which many of us are more familiar. And the PI of the project, which is Patricia Murrieta Flores, was also one of our guest speakers last year. So if you are interested in knowing more about this, feel free to check that early seminar. And another factor that we found is that is place related, and is, let's say, a drive for engagement, is proximity. And we tend to care more about the things that are near to us. And I believe there is no one better suited to talk us about proximity and how proximity and nearness can be engaging than James Morley. And I'm handing it over to you, James.
Good afternoon. A little bit of very quick background about me. I've worked in museums and cultural heritage collections for rather too long, more than I care to mention. But this was actually a personal project, and something that was just born out of a kind of a frustration of seeing lots and lots of data being created about the First World War, but not being connected together and presented in a way that was especially engaging. So if you like, they were creating the archive, but not the engagement and the experience and the way people could discover it well. So really just over the course of a week, although I've been processing a lot of data, I suddenly decided it was time to put this site together. And what I'll show you first off in the first part of this session is the thought processes and how I went about it. And then in the second part, we'll cover some of the impacts. So if we can switch to the slides, Gabby. Thank you. So as I've kind of introduced, it's a personal project. I was intrigued to see what could be done with this data. There was a frustration about no one else really doing it, certainly none of the big institutions. But at the end of the day, it was just really a personal thing that I wanted to experiment with and build as a demonstrator and see what sort of thing could come out of it. It was based solely on open data from various sources that I'll describe, and I think it'll give a little bit of insight into the different things that we think of as, or we should think of as open data. And it was translated into a map primarily because I like maps, and it seemed an obvious thing to do with it. But the critical thing was, and the huge surprise to me, was this little demonstrator that I was just experimenting with suddenly caught on and caught everybody's imagination. It was at the time of the 100th centenary of the end of the First World War on the Western Front in November 2018. And the site had 240,000 people visit it in 3 days. And since then, those figures have grown, although much more steadily. And I'll cover that in the second session. So I've already kind of explained what I'll do. I'll talk about the motivations and the challenges of doing it, and then the impact side of things and the reaction that the site got in the second part. I'm going to skip that one. So at the heart of it is a data set from the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. After the end of the First World War, they made absolutely meticulous records of those who had died from Commonwealth countries. Another very critical part of any data set and any website is to be very clear to users what it represents and equally what it doesn't represent. So this is solely Commonwealth combatant. So it doesn't cover French, it doesn't cover German, Italian. It's the Commonwealth countries. But within this data set, they have over 1 million records of those who died, men and women. And within that, at the time, which was just after the end of the First World War, they gathered next of kin information. And about 600,000 of these records have the sort of text that you can see there. So it's talking about who they were the son of and where they lived. And this was just around the corner from where I lived several years ago. Now that intrigued me. You sort of think of that as time that I know that house. I go past that house, and here we have a record that's over about 100 years old, talking about someone who died well over 100 years ago, who lived in that house, and as such as was said earlier, such a direct connection with that place. Crucially, this data set was downloadable with CSV export, so you need the technical access to the data. But another aspect of it, which is very important, is the licensing, and there was no clear licensing on this. But at the previously, I'd been working at Imperial War Museum, and I knew some of the historians at Commonwealth War Graves, and they basically given a green light and said, yeah, if you want to do anything with it, do it. But that still wasn't really the certainty that would have been ideal. So I started small and just did some first experiments, and in the map on the left, the green area towards the bottom right is actually the park in which the Imperial War Museum is based. And when I was working there, I just started, I think I downloaded all the records that mentioned Lambeth, and I georeferenced them, quite a manual process at the time, against the Google API. I tried a few, but Google's were giving me the best result with what was quite messy, inconsistently formatted data. And then through that, I was able just to create a little Google map, which is what you see on the left there. At this stage, it was just the Commonwealth War Graves data. And then I'd wander out in a lunchtime and go to some of these locations. And literally just around the corner, you have this pharmacy building. And this chap had essentially, or his parents at least, lived in that house at the time of the First World War. And so there was that connection. Now that's 1 of 1 million records. I also did it within my local community. I was, at the time I was living in Ealing in West London. This was 2017, and I put a little test map just of that local data on, again, through Google Maps, and put it on the local Facebook group, and got some incredible reaction. And it kind of answers that question: is it just me that's interested in this thing? And it was clear that it wasn't. So that gave me the encouragement to carry on and scale this up. Because when you start scaling it up, do you just go UK or whatever? And really, a sort of lesson from this is, if you're going to do it with 1,000 records and you've proved your concept, then why not do it with 1 million? It's just time, basically, and processing power and API recalls and things that hold you back, rather than anything sort of more fundamental than that. But crucially to this, I felt the maps didn't have that level of engagement beyond, oh, that's a record of a person who lived there. But within all of the work I'd previously done professionally, I'd been working on image collections of portraits of soldiers, a big crowdsourced project that was looking for military and family history of individuals, called Lives of the First World War. And this was where this desire to kind of tie these things together and build something much more powerful came from it. So here we have a collection at Imperial War Museum with 6,000 portraits. Again, in a way, these were crowdsourced. Even during the war, the government put out an official appeal to families to send in portraits of their family members who had been killed in the conflict. And this extended to Australia, to New Zealand, to Canada, to South Africa. And they were collecting these images in and wanted to make this commemoration of those who had given their lives in the war. And of course, 100 years on, it's digitized, it's catalogued, it's accessible, and suddenly we can sort of draw on that. But the interesting thing is, how do we tie those in with the official records of those who died? And it was really just a quirk of the way they'd been curated, that the the curators had literally cut and pasted exact text from the Commonwealth War Graves records into those records. And so by matching those two together, we could tell which ones related to which. Ideally, in a linked open data sort of world, someone would have put an ID in and that would have solved it all. But this took a little bit more processing. And there were some interesting side effects from that. There were a few that were ambiguous. Sometimes it was because they were very vague. So it would just say, you know, son of John Smith of London. And of course, there were quite a few sons of John Smiths of London. But in other cases, they were an exact match to more than one soldier, but for quite detailed text. And the incredible thing about that was revealing brothers. And in one case, I think brother and sister who had both died. I'll come a little bit more to that in the second section. Access to this data was an unofficial API that powered their website. They don't have a public API, but I was able to sort of tap into it with a little bit of insider knowledge. And thankfully, these were all available under an open government license. So I knew there was no issue there with using it in a non-commercial application. So that was great, and I could just plow on without getting held up by permissions or looking at individual images. It was a data set I could just use. So the third data set I'll talk about is Lives of the First World War. This covered actually over 7 million individuals who served. This was all crowdsourced. Within their data, they had connected a good number, 600,000 of them, to Commonwealth War Graves ID. So those were immediate direct matches that I could tap into. And then subsequently, we did a big process of linking up records by service number, date of death, surname, and other details, regiments and what have you. And we just had to build some rules that said if enough of the record matches in such a unique way that it couldn't be someone else, then we'll call that a good match. And since then, we've also added about 35,000 in a sort of manual process, but by drawing up a record where we knew there wasn't a connection, looking them up via an interface and just tying them together in that way. Any of this, I won't go into how much detail, but any of it that anybody wants to find out more, they can always email me or tweet me or whichever. Again, this was data access through CSV downloads. There was an open government license. And through this, we enriched so much of the data with full forenames, with links to external assets and so on, and with a lot more portraits as well. So all of a sudden, through these three data sets, we've got this very rich record of so many different people. And then ultimately, I've since added a lot more specific projects, but I'm running out of time, I think, so I better just skip through this a little bit. But essentially, these were centenary funded projects, but regional ones. And as Valeria was saying earlier, that sort of tapping into local communities is such a great way of teasing out both very specific information held within those communities, but also just their knowledge of piecing and their time and effort and skills and dedication, really, of pulling together lots of different things. And in this case, this was just the data was accessed by scraping their web pages. There were no data downloads. There was no API. And you know, if you've got the dedication, you can just you know, and the pages have got enough structure, you can do it that way in a relatively simple way. And again, it's a whole another session to explain that, but I can go into more detail if anybody wants on another occasion. So in that case, sorry, there was no clear indication of copyright. So I've simply added links to their site. So on any of the records on my site, it just says, here's some more details, go and find out there. So it becomes this kind of research hub to find out more. And there's just some examples of many, many more places. So just to end up this first session, a little bit about how it was built. It was all on open source and free software, using web standards where possible. The data access, as I've explained, was CSV, was API endpoints. It was all pushed into a big MySQL database. Some PHP code was extracting the location information, pulling up georeferences using Google API. And then once that big data set was built, and I'll go into some stats later, just using the Bootstrap design framework, if anybody's familiar with building web pages, it's a great place to start because it takes so much of the complication out of it. And then the map display was with Leaflet, which is a JavaScript-based, again, free tool, which can take data from many sources. But in this case, I used the GeoJSON standard to create those dynamic displays, because there's so much data, you couldn't display it all at once. It had to be done in a sort of filtered kind of way. And then standard web hosting and Google Analytics was capturing the usage stats. And just finally, we can't talk about this as if it's all lovely smelling of roses and so easy. There was a few issues encountered along the way. Firstly, the quality of the source data meant that a lot of those text strings had to be processed to remove the noise and filter in, just so that when you're asking Google where something is, you are just giving them an address to geolocate and no other information with it that would confuse it. But you can improve that by saying, well, if you know it's in Australia, then just give me results that are in Australia, so you don't get these dummy results that says, oh, I know of a Sydney in North America or somewhere. But there was still errors, and the two I'll cover here, I haven't got larger scale, so they're probably not that clear, but the image on the left is of Florence in Italy, and there's 70 odd markers there. Actually, it turns out that it's found the name Florence within the text. And so those are outright errors. They've been placed in the wrong place because it's interpreted the wrong bit of information. The lady's name, Florence, it's thought it's a location and placed it on the map. So that's just an error. On the right shows Nepal, and this was a great example of not digging into the format of the source data enough, and a simple full stop meant that in the first iteration of the map, I missed virtually every record of every Nepalese soldier who died in the First World War, and that's quite a profound and important mistake, in terms of giving fair representation. And it was a very quick fix, but I didn't spot it in the first iteration. So it's really important to look for these errors. But this was the end result. 1.1 million servicemen and women represented, 733,000 location records, 31,000 portraits, 14,000 other images, and 4.6 million links out to external sources, whether that was the Commonwealth War Graves source record, Lives of the First World War, Imperial War Museum, but also through those sources, lots of other links that were made and therefore available through the profiles. And that's my first section concluded. I will hand back, and we'll come back to actually what happened when the site was launched in the second part.
Great, thank you, James. And thank you. No worries, and thank you for introducing a couple of the themes that we're gonna dig in just now. I'm not sure if Gabby is with us, but I'm gonna just share my screen now. Oh yes, you are. Great. Okay, so we mentioned community mapping at the beginning, but we have not really defined the concept, and I think it is useful to talk a little bit about some key terms in this topic, in this discussion. And I would also like to talk a little bit about citizen science and what is the difference and the overlaps with community mapping. And they are both quite large concepts, sometimes used as umbrella terms. These are not official or let's say, extensive explanations. Let's say that they are just to give you an idea of the concept, and very much, let's say, in the perspective of the topic that we're talking about. So citizen science is basically about asking volunteers that are non-expert in a particular field to contribute to a particular task, or to help processing some information in a field. And you may gather that it is very close to the concept of crowdsourcing, and sometimes it's quite hard to see really a line that separates them, but they are all, concepts that are useful in what we are talking about. Let's say that citizen science definitely uses crowdsourced information to produce an academic output, even though part of the information comes from non-academics, non-experts in the field. And there are loads of examples of very, very famous and successful citizen science projects that go from, the natural sciences, and spotting penguins, and counting stars, and counting and mapping brain cells, and so on. And the word citizen in this context might be slightly misleading. It actually doesn't have anything specifically to do with geography or cities or things like that. It's more of a, let's say, ethical term in which citizen is used. But it is undeniable that this mechanism is it's a really good fit to gather geographical information, and this for a number of reasons that we will talk more about. At first, because it enables us to gather, let's say, diffuse information, and using the actual location of several contributors gives us more granular data, but also because again, it gives us an insight on how places are actually lived. Community mapping is something a little bit different, and it's more specifically about actual maps and actual concepts of space. And it's about asking the people that live in a place, that live in an area, that could be a city, it could be, it could be a region, to describe, to name, to even interpret the space they live in or they have lived in. So to give their experience of the place, and to help create a map, create a symbolic representation of that space. And in particular, one thing that it's really strong in community mapping is inviting people to identify what are the most valuable features in a place that they perceive, the things that they believe are worthy of being, on a map of that place. Because sometimes, we feel like there is a standardization in the representation of place that really, let's say, leaves out some information that is actually very valuable for some communities. And I want to actually go back one slide to show you one of my absolute favorite maps ever. And this beautiful map was that you can click on the link and check out online. It's a map of Beirut through its trees and birds that was made by a group of activists in Beirut, and it points on the map where are the few surviving trees in Beirut, which is a beautiful city, but sadly the house development is it's getting rid of most of green areas, and the community has started really caring about each single tree that survived in the city enough to create this amazing map. And it's of course also it's community mapping, but it's also a citizen science project, because they also ask people, for example, to to tag the site of particular birds and so on. And this is to go back to the fact that these two concepts are very much interconnected, and we will see applications of both of them where, you know, it's really no use trying to separate them, but it's more interesting to see the interaction between two concepts. And both these approaches can help us leveraging the connection that people feel with places to improve the information about the place. So in the end, let's say that it's a sort of win-win situation. And now I'm gonna just show you a number of examples that I think showcase this kind of approach. Starting from you know, the most straightforward, which is the New York Public Library Surveyor, which is simply about, you know, asking people to share their knowledge about a place to improve the metadata of a library. So in this service, you basically see one of the pictures in the catalog that represents the city of New York, and you try to pin it on the map. You try and say, okay, this photograph represents this exact address. And you can imagine how much this increases the granularity of the metadata of the collection, and how much this can improve the search function of the collection. But I think it's also a great way of preserving the information of a cityscape that, you know, that changes, because there are people that might have memory, living memory, or maybe they are historians, or maybe they know it for other reasons. They know about places that are not visible anymore, but they used to be in a particular location. And I think this information is very, very precious. And I would also like to retell an anecdote that one of the interviewees I spoke with at the Hastings Museum, they said they had basically a team of senior citizens that are called when they cannot date a photograph, because these people are very good at establishing the date of a photograph looking at the city landmarks in it, because they remember perfectly when something was built, when something was taken down, so they can date a photograph looking at the buildings that they can spot. And I thought that was there was quite a nice interaction between the community and the museum. Another example of how citizen science can be applied to place information and generate knowledge that is useful to everyone is a website that, if you are a classicist or an archaeologist or anyone who has ever had even a tangential connection with Pompeii, probably know already, which is Pompeii Pictures. And this website was born again without any funding, just by the passion of a couple of retired people with a passion for Pompeii. They were not archaeologists, they were not academics, they just really loved Pompeii. And what they did was starting to take photographs of every single building in Pompeii from different angles. And this is not trivial at all, because there are a lot of buildings in Pompeii that are outside the major routes, and they are overlooked. And through the years, the website, this really, it was very, 1990s looking website done with, nothing, started growing, and they started collecting contributions from just other people that were as passionate as they were about Pompeii. And they started collecting also historical images like old photographs and postcards, and people going to their honeymoon in Pompeii and taking souvenir pictures and so on. And they also started inheriting historical archives. And now what they have created is basically a way to monitor the level of decay of most of buildings in Pompeii. And this is an invaluable feature because, cultural heritage is fragile, and it is very useful to have information about, how and when things get damaged, the things that have been restored, the things that have been moved, the things, that have been destroyed, that are not visible anymore. They really created an invaluable resource. And through these examples, I also wanted to introduce the concept of citizen curatorship, which is a kind of citizen science that really, again, leverages the connection that people have with their, especially local cultural heritage, to make them feel involved into its protection. So to make them feel like they are stakeholders in the cultural heritage because it belongs to them. And so that they are involved into protecting it and recording it and actually producing this these pictures at different moments in time does help then professional curators to take better care of the cultural heritage. And something of this concept can also be seen in an app, well, in a feature that is available on Historic England website. And first of all, there is a map where you can see where are all the listed buildings and the protected built environment. So you can, for example, check, okay, what is next to me? What I can, go and see during my lunch break walk when we used to have that. But also what Historic England decided to do was to open their, the official webpage for each listed building to comments and content from registered users. That means that people can go to the place that is on the map, take a photograph of the building or whatever. I mean, sometimes there are weird things in that list, and upload the picture. And again, this is not only a great way of engaging people, but as we've seen with the example of Pompeii, it's also actually useful information because you have a record of how that protected building is doing through the years, maybe in its cleaning, maybe in its restoration, and so on. And another thing that I believe it's important to notice, and that came up during our interviews, is that at the beginning, they were a little bit reluctant to actually enable this feature because they fear that enabling users, even registered users, to add content would have, let's say, spoiled that feeling of, this is the official page of that building, of that listed monument. But they decided to go on with it, and it actually paid off a lot because what they found is that actually the pages that do have users' content are the pages that are visited the most. And I've tried it myself and I can confirm it. I prefer to browse pages that do have extra information, not just pictures, but extra information, because I think they feel, more lively. They feel more interesting. And I want to go back to place names and how much they matter for cultural identities. And that's because toponyms are, a big thing of what I do. I work on gazetteers. I'm really passionate about toponyms. I'm really passionate about how place names have been changing through time. But it's not a quirk of mine. They do matter, and UNESCO has recognized place names as part of cultural heritage. And one thing that I believe it is really important is to preserve the information about place names for a number of reasons, not only historical but also cultural. And I'm really glad that I kept a screenshot of this tweet because I really wanted to use it in a class. So thank you, Gabby, for letting me do this class, because I finally can show this. And this is a screenshot of a tweet in which someone is saying that the name of a road in what is known in London as, London's Little India has been changed, and it has now, a name that is not offensive and not triggering for the community that actually lives there. And someone commented, "What a load of nonsense. What if we went to India and started to change their street names?" And I found this absolutely hilarious, and I really wanted to share this with you, because that's exactly what happens, what has happened when there is, a colonial relationship, when a territory is occupied, when there is, let's say, a statement of power over another country. One of the very first things that happens is that place names and street names and all that kind of information is changed. And if we need another example, if I were looking at this map without knowing where this place is, being an Italian myself, I can see all the street names in Italian, not only in Italian, but they are named after Italian writers and Italian personalities and Italian kings and queens. So this could really be any port city in Italy, but it is actually a map of the city of Tripoli in Libya during colonial times. So every single place name had been changed. And I think that it is one of the things that we can do with collecting data from the community can revolve around place names. And I want to mention another project that I think is really interesting. It's another gazetteer. And in this case is the Heritage Gazetteer of Cyprus. That was the PIs were Charlotte Rouchet and Stuart Dunn at King's College London, and its aim was to collect all the place names ever recorded for all places in Cyprus. And you may be aware that Cyprus is kind of it's in a delicate political situation, and place names are hugely important to them. And this project actually had to be, quite careful at, being legally correct. And even though all the names that appear in the gazetteer are, as we say, attestation based, that means that all the names recorded are recorded because they actually appear, they have been printed in a document. So what this gazetteer says is there is this name appearing in this document at this point in time. But still, the first name, which is very important in a gazetteer, the first name that appears is what is known as the default name. And even though it's not written anywhere, there is this, convention that the first name is the most important name. And they had to be, really careful that the first name appearing there was the default name that has been, agreed by governmental authorities, and then all the others. But it's good that we have. It's good to have them all. But what I think is one of the most interesting aspects of what digital means can do and what digital culture heritage can achieve is not, it's taking things a step further. It's not just recording the names, it's not just recording the data about places, which, as you might have gathered, I think already are important enough. But we can take things even further and start asking people about their experience of the place. And I think that then it's when things start getting more complicated and be more interesting. And there are some projects that I think are really, really outstanding, that basically ask people to contribute their documents about places or, about various events in their lives, but we are focusing on places here. And so that together we can start building, let's say, photographic documentary archives of a particular place, and maybe the different views that are connected to that place and the different experiences that might be related to that specific place, and views that sometimes, can be not fully overlapping, which makes it even more rich, even richer. And one of those projects is Digital NZ. By the way, there was just today a beautiful webinar in which they were presenting the project. I'm really happy to share the link later in the further readings. But if you click again on this tweet that I screenshotted, there is I wasn't able to find that video anywhere else, so I just put a reference to the tweet. There is this promo video in which they show that you can take the images, the photographs, the postcards, the family photos of a particular place that you have been collecting dust in your drawer, and you can digitize them and you can upload them on this platform and add your memories about it and your information about it, your experience of your interpretation of that place. And this was really also the dream of the PI of yet another heritage gazetteer, the one for Libya, that was again Charlotte Rouchet. She really wanted to do the same or something similar with Libyan documents. She really wanted to get Libyans to feel like they were the first and most important stakeholders of the Heritage Gazetteer of Libya, and start associating the work that we did on place names to documents that really show how these places were lived, were interpreted. We're not there yet, and it's a long process. It takes a lot of effort and community building and trust building. But I really hope they get there, because I really love to see there. And I would also like to point out that in the Heritage Gazetteer of Libya, the default name is the Arabic, which is something that Charlotte really thought about. She shouldn't have, but she shouldn't have had to, but she had to, and this is how it looks like now, and we're happy about it. So to conclude and go back to discovering more about James' project, what can we do with these very different kind of geo data, place-related data, location data? Well, many things, but these are, I believe, those that emerged a little bit more during our conversation. And first of all, we can improve the information that we offer, we in Culture Heritage offer about places. And with improve, I mean making it more granular as more precise. So we have more detailed information. We have just more information, which is always good. But we improve it in the sense also that we make it more diverse. We start including more voices, more place names, more memories, more different ways of looking at the same place. We can use places and the fact that they can, to an extent, be standardized through coordinates, to gazetteers, to URIs, to using vocabularies, controlled vocabularies for place names and place relationships to connect different data sets, which is something that James did, something that Pelagius did, something that we hope to do with locating a national collection, which can then generate new kind of discoveries and possibly new kind of ways of traveling through documents. And last, we can hopefully improve the engagement with culture heritage. We can use use as leverage respectfully the connection, the emotional connection, the life connection that people have with places to bring them closer to culture heritage. And I hope I haven't spoken for too long, and I'm very happy to hear from James more about his work. You muted, James. I think you're...
That's better. Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, yeah, wonderful. And I'm going to add you.
I was just coughing away, so I'd got to put myself on mute, clear my throat. Yeah, so we're on the, we'll go straight to the slides. That's great. Thank you. So picking up on that very last point then on the public engagement, that's really what this second part of my talk is all about. I'm aware I'm going to have to be quite quick because we've overrun quite a lot, but hopefully with Gabby's permission I can skip through this quite quick. So just a reminder that this second part is really to show what was created out of all of this data, what the initial reaction to that was in terms of the public audience, and then a final part about what the longer term impact of it is. So a reminder of those numbers, I won't read them out again, but vast amounts of data and connections and images and so on that were all gathered together. And ultimately, I ended up presenting them just on one map. I mean, when the site launched, it literally was one page with one map. This is what it broadly looked like. This is actually a more modern screen grab with a few more features on it, but essentially this was it. I found very interesting the way such a large amount of data, when I oversimplified it, it looked very scant and didn't relay that impact. So making it very crowded and busy was something that I intentionally did, because then it was to draw people into it. But essentially what you're looking at there is anything in purple is an aggregate of the people in that particular locality who died, or the records relate to where they were from. And then the green ones are actually the cemeteries, the places where they're buried. So for those who don't have a home address or anything that was georeferenceable, at least they are presented in terms of where they are. Top left is a key feature, which is actually the map search. Go straight to a location. I'll talk about a little bit more of that in a minute. But essentially, if you zoomed in on the map, this is going into West London. Funnily enough, Southall is just on the left there, where the Temple and Havelock Road is, and so on, or was. But again, as you drill in, you still presented with this quite overwhelming sense of numbers, and that, as I say, was probably the single biggest thing I experimented with when at a technical level building the site, was the resolution of the way the data was presented, enriched with photographs, which were another key part. So this is starting to show how the data was all aggregated together. And then when you literally go into street level, you can start exploring the individual names. You can start relating it to your own environment and your own location that you know. And then finally, hanging off of all of that was essentially a profile page for an individual. And remember, there's about 1.1 million of these represented, but each one of those pulls up what's known about them when they died, their rank, the regiment, and then any of an image if it's there, and any of the outward links. So, at its crudest level, that was what it was for. It was just to drill down to individuals. But in reality, what I very quickly saw with the way people were using the site was the connections they were making, and it really was about discovering individuals and discovering more about their immediate communities. So this is the chap that was presented on that map, Herbert Lappage, killed in action 27th of March 1918. That's represented in the Commonwealth War Graves data, as I've shown before. And just in the crude sense, this is the data, but then we can go on Street View. This isn't within the site, this is just going on to Google and looking up that address. But this is literally the house that he lived in. A discovery within all of this, as I mentioned before, sometimes you could make connections between two people at the same address. And this is an example. These are two brothers. Now, nowhere in the original collections data were these two records linked together. But this is a family that lost two sons in the First World War. And as I say, at an address literally 100 yards from where I used to live. And we can even start to capture that as data and feed that back to the collections as well, now that those extra connections have been made. So I mentioned in my first part of the talk that I did a demonstrator for my local community a year before the site actually launched, really just to test out the concept. And as I was building the final site, this was on the 9th of November, so 2 days before the conclusion of the First World War, the anniversary of the centenary, this tweet came through. And the amazing thing was, there I was, not having launched, but about to launch the full site. But this is a project that a local primary school, again at the end of my road, had done based on the original data. And this was a real sort of, it brought a tear to my eye. I was actually walking around Imperial War Museum's galleries. It didn't work there anymore, but I was there at the time. And this school had taken that original data from a year previously, just done for the Ealing area, and used it to make wreaths for a primary school, to make wreaths for all of the 9 men on the road that the school was based on. And so suddenly, they're taking what to me is data, and just doing something so personal and so connected to their immediate community. And I think probably that was the moment that I knew that I really was onto something, and it might get quite a strong reaction. And the site wasn't quite as ready as I wanted it to be. I was planning on launching it probably on the Saturday, but I sent them a link and said, well, you can explore more here. And I never promoted the site at all, but I think that's the moment at which it started to take off. It was very clear from those initial reactions what people saw in the site. This is the tweet that sums it up to me. It says, enter your postcode. And that is what 500,000 people did in the first month of the site without me telling them to. They used that map search from the top left and just went to locations that they had a connection with, whether it was a home address or a family address or something. And they just got it. And that's exactly how most people experienced the site. They came in, they probably saw the big map and thought, wow, look at all those numbers and so on. But then they just went straight to a community. This is only public Facebook groups and tweets, but this gives an indication of where people were sharing the site. And I had no idea at all that there were so many local history and local history and local community groups out there. We've got Southampton, Sudbury, Saffron Walden, Paisley, Old Stirling, Hull, Beckenham, Birmingham, Great Yarmouth. You look through this list, there's just so many places represented here, and people were sharing it on their Facebook groups and saying, look at this, look at our community. And it's really striking, and the numbers of interactions. And I can go into the public ones of these and see the comments that were made, and you just see that people's reactions and that connection that they had. But even here, this was in national press. This was on the 11th of November. Suzanne Moore, in an opinion piece, led her article using data from the site to describe what she'd learned about her own road and the neighbouring roads, and how that had impacted her and made her realise about the immediate impact in her community that the First World War had. And then just such emotional, personal connections that people had. This tweet here: seems like my street lost a lot of Alfreds in the First World War. I'm holding mine a little tighter. Just so emotional, such an emotional connection that the map had delivered to this person. Big numbers again, 240,000 users in the first 3 days, 500,000 location lookups, and it's now had 1 million unique users since in just over 2 years since the site launched. 4,000 tweets to the site, at least that anyway. And most of the traffic in those first 3 days was referral from Facebook primarily, but Twitter as well, so social media. I will skip over the majority of this, but basically now it's switched, and people are using it as a research tool and looking up individuals, names, regiments, ships, and the site is now getting, it's actually now growing after it sunk, and getting around 1,600 users per day still coming to the site, which is, yeah, they're quite big numbers for what would you think of as quite a niche kind of website. And just in terms of the longer term impact of the site, what I'm seeing now is people are very much using it in education. There's been a little dialogue I've had on Twitter this morning with secondary school teachers about how they're using it as teaching resources. I don't prepare the resources. In fact, several teachers have posted their own teaching resources that they've made out of that are based on the website, which is very humbling that people would send people to your site to do that. And this is happening at primary and secondary level as well. And then finally, just obviously the site has connected and even created quite a lot of data, including the geodata primarily. Another conversation today was about how you could map demographic data of the ranks of people who died to the affluence of the area in which they lived and so on. And this is, now quite a unique data set that I'm more than happy to make available to people if they want to explore those sorts of angles. And even Commonwealth war graves, I mentioned at the beginning that there was no clear rights usage on their data and so on, but they've totally embraced the site and allowed me to carry on using their data. But now they're even linking to the site in their own research guides for people who are looking to research people who died in the First World War. And adding it as a resource there, which is again lovely thing to see. I actually need to get some funding really so that I'm not paying for my hosting, but it doesn't cost an awful lot of money to run it each month. So I ought to do a Wikipedia style crowdfunding type thing. But for now it's just ticking along and it's fine. So just I was going to quickly conclude, and really must do it quickly. I think it's a sort of, my biggest lessons learned from all of this are that if you have an idea, you must try it out. Just give it a go and see what happens. Try it out at a small scale, understand your data. But if you've just got that hunch that there's a sort of an opportunity within the data to engage people, to do something maybe novel, maybe not so novel, but just find a different angle into things to engage people, then give it a go, because as this has proven, you can be very surprised at the sheer numbers of people and the way they can interpret the data and use it and connect with it more than anything else. So it is all about looking at that data and processing it and getting out meaningful context. In this case, it was georeferencing. All of those addresses needed to be translated into point data so that they could be presented on the map. I mentioned before about scale. If you can process 100 records, you can typically process 1 million records. It will just take more processing time, but not more code, not more resources of any other sort, really. You just have to let it tick away and do it. But equally, you can start simple, and you should start simple, just to get something built, to as I say, to start sort of testing out your theory, your idea, and so on. And after all of that, you can repeat it, you can refine it, you can add more ideas and more data and do more testing. But if you've got that simple thing out there, then that can give you also the encouragement to carry on and do more. And then just on a broader level of how and why these projects can work, is you don't need perfect data. You don't need APIs with perfect licensing. They are barriers that you have to overcome, but they can be overcome. Joining up data and extracting concepts and context from the records is absolutely critical to this is what takes it apart from being just a museum's interface and a collection and a archive into a sort of much more engaging, richer experience for users. And you just need to find that hook that excites and engages users. And one of my I've made a very nice connection. This retired academic called David Lever, who's studied things like the way place is associated with. He's a particular fan of Bob Dylan, and he studied the way that the places that are connected to Bob Dylan's life have become these kind of shrines and tourist attractions and so on. But he was describing the site as this intimate link between life, death, and place, and the way those all interrelate and connect together. But fundamentally, I would say just trust your instincts and get on and do things and play, because there's so much great data out there that has not had its full potential harnessed. So thank you. I will leave that one there.
Oh, thank you, James. I'm not clear if Gabby can take over the chairing. Otherwise, yeah, well, that's no, maybe don't.
It looks like he's not there.
Are you? Not sure. Anyway, that was great. I'm a big fan of your project, as you know, and I really enjoyed this walkthrough. Just a few words about the exercise for the people that are watching this as part of their MA module. You will find the description in the GitHub page, and the exercise will basically ask you to use one of a quite successful platform that was called Layers of London, that is built on the idea of, let's say, the complexity of the city and how the same place can be relevant to different communities, to different groups for different reasons. So what you will see in Layers of London, I'm not gonna, show you anything on screen or give you too much information, because there is actually a very well done tutorial on their website that is also linked in the page. Plus, it's very easy. So simply think of, and you can do this exercise as a single person. You can team up with one other person or make a small group as you prefer. Think of an aspect of London that you would like to make a map of, and you're probably a classicist or archaeologist, so maybe you want to think of, I don't know, places in London where you can see Roman bits, or buildings in London that are inspired to classical buildings, to Egyptian buildings, or feel free to pick something completely different. I don't know, the places in London where you, I don't know, like to go and watch the sunset or whatever, and create a layer and basically choose an historical map if you like, and start adding pins on that map and connect to that pin some content. Ideally, they should be online documents, but we are aware that you may not have your personal archive on London at hand. So feel free to just explain in a block of text why you have included that place in your map. Maybe include a link to Wikipedia or any other external authority or website that should do. Also, browse the other collections that are already there. There are some very interesting ones. Get an idea of how the project works and why something like that can be relevant for different communities. Also feel free to have a go at a street near you if you haven't already. I bet some of you were already were doing it in real time. If you have not, have a go and try to understand not only the final result and its historical and emotional appeal, but also a little bit of how it works. Thinking of what James explained about how we worked on the data and so on. So try to look at it with a little bit of an informed perspective. Now we have overrun even the time for questions, but I think that I don't see questions from the YouTube viewers, but if there is anything, James, that you wanted to add or to ask me, feel free to. I would ask you too many things.
No, I'm. Layers of London's a great site, actually. It's really, really good. And they're now, I saw just the other week that they're actually releasing the software for others to use potentially, which is a great thing to give back to the community as well, and spin-off projects and so on. Would be great.
I will ask you a question now. I'm going to be a little bit selfish. I'm going to ask you something that really interests me. I hope it interests the people listening as well. Can you tell us just a little bit more about how, let's say, the process of making the data talk to each other? I mean, a little bit more about the cleaning up of the data. How did that happen? With what tools? Because you said you created a data set, but a database, but I imagine that the data was very heterogeneous at the source.
Yeah, so a couple of things within that. At its root are the Commonwealth War Graves records. They all crucially have a unique and persistent identifier, even though it's just in the URL. It's not a DOI or anything like that. But and so that proved to be that was my kind of base identifier. As I mentioned briefly, but the other record sources were linked by various methods. I mean, the most astonishing one was the Imperial War Museum portraits. There was nothing to link them to that official record and attach the identifier to it, but the curators had cut and pasted the exact same text that was the son of Herbert, of John and Vera Lappage of 108 Felix Road. They pasted that into the record, and so you could do that matching, and with a lot of checking as well. But the error rate was virtually nil, which was great. I mean, it showed that they literally had cut and paste. Other aspects, I mean, any site that linked to the Commonwealth War Graves record, then and that was true, for example, for some of the New Zealand and Australian records, then you had this one-to-one match sitting there in the data. I mean, often it was just in the web page, it wasn't data as such. And then I've had a few of the old Lives of the First War volunteers working with me using a couple of very simple tools I built to look up some of the anomalies and the missing ones and so on. And it's all about understanding the data and having it hopefully in enough structure in the two sources to be able to sort of say, well, I know without doubt that is one and the same entity. And that could be, you have to be very, very careful, because you can, especially when you're dealing with a few thousand John Smiths, it kind of, but if you've got a regiment and a service number and a date of death and they all match up, then you have that degree of confidence. And ultimately it was about setting that level of how much do you need to be matched to be sure. And yeah, we probably erred, but for very good reason, on the side of caution. And there were many more matches we could have made, but there was just something in the records that made us, have a hesitation. And I say that, I mean, this was all coded. It wasn't looking at things side by side, but it was enough to say, right, if there's not a perfect match on at least those fields, reject it. And that's where the humans then come in. So we're missing connections from probably about 150,000 records still of the 1.1 million. 150,000 sounds a lot, but it's we've made a big dent on it.
Is it a future crowdsourced project maybe?
Yeah, potentially, because it's literally, well, on that side of things, it's been one person who's been helping me. to do those connections, and she sits there sometimes at 3 o'clock in the morning and tapping away and connecting things, and it's been brilliant to see. So yeah.
No, I can think of a couple of potential enthusiastic contributors.
Yeah.
Data side and data wise, and also labor wise. Okay. If there are no questions from our audience, I think we can just thank Gabby in absentia, all the people that watch this and will watch this, and James for joining us and giving us an overview of such an interesting project.
If anybody does have any questions, then Twitter or email or contact details are on the website anyway, so feel free to drop me a line.
Thank you. And if you have any issues with the readings or the exercise, you can use the GitHub feature to discuss that. So great, thank you, and see you. I won't be there, but see you next Thursday, everyone. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.